Hey guys, what's up? The clips I'm going to show you are actually a few weeks old. I recorded them before I left. I just got back a couple days ago, and you can tell these are the old ones because they've got the god awful fashion. This is really a byproduct of me trying to play around with poise on this build and see just how much poise I could stack on my solo level 36. And the answer is quite a bit. This guy's got about 30 poise. I've reworked him since this video was recorded. I think he's got even more poise on my new build, and the fashion is actually somewhat presentable, unlike this guy. One thing that happened actually while I was gone is there was a sort of kind of announcement about Dark Souls 1, some sort of remaster coming out. And I'm personally very curious to see it because my sort of Dark Souls journey, I played Dark Souls 1 was the first one that I played, and I never did play Demon Souls. But I never really did PvP to speak of until Dark Souls 3. And I'm kind of I'm not sure what they're going to do with it. I actually went back to Dark Souls 1 to try out the PvP maybe 6 or 8 months back, and what I found was pretty disheartening. I know there's a lot of complaints about the PvP in Dark Souls 3, but in my view, and I know a lot of people will disagree with this, the PvP in Dark Souls 1 was just awful. The combat itself was good. They set a great template, and you can tell by just how much they emulated it here. But PvP is about so much more than the combat. It's about the matchups, it's about the weapons, it's about the tech. In Dark Souls 1, while I had a lot of, quote, tech, the tech was all a byproduct of a bunch of errors in the code. Almost all the tech that people like in that game was a complete accident. Nothing in that game was the way that it was because the designers intended it to be that way. It was that way because of glitches. And people that have done a lot of PvP in that game were able to sort of take advantage of the bugs in the code essentially, and be able to do things that other players couldn't do. And so it did reward a lot of skill. People that played that game a lot were able to do things that other people couldn't do. And so there was a much greater sort of separation of skills. At least this is by and large my understanding. I am not one of those skilled players in Dark Souls 1. But it was really frustrating because there was, as far as I know, no soul level matching, at least in some of the covenants. Maybe there was in some others, but I was in the forest at like soul level 30, invading people that were like soul level 150. The parry mechanism made it way too easy to get parries, in my view. And the twinking in that game was just horrendous. Players in the beginning of that game were getting invaded by people with end game gear. This game, Dark Souls 3 meaning, has gone a long way to reduce twinking, and what there is really isn't that bad in comparison, which isn't to say that they couldn't improve it. From certainly could, and make it so that twinking was even less of an issue, maybe via things like elimination of dropping rings and whatnot. Not that I want them to do that, but they could make some improvements there. But anyway, this is a very long-winded way of saying that my anticipation is that as part of this remaster for Dark Souls 1, they're going to have to go back to the drawing board for how they manage the PvP, meaning things like the matchups. Are they going to get rid of the tech and all the programming bugs that were there, or are they going to deliberately keep those? And I expect that whatever they decide to do, it's going to hugely split the community. I think probably half of the folks are like myself and would much prefer a combat experience akin to this game, Dark Souls 3, with the levels and enemies and weapons of Dark Souls 1. Whereas the folks that cut their teeth on Dark Souls 1 PvP, folks that excelled at it and are good at it, would probably prefer that it be kept largely the way that it is. But for folks coming new into that game, I expect if they keep it that way, they're just going to get too frustrated and not want to play it, similarly to the way that I felt going back to Dark Souls 1 and trying to play the PvP, having come from Dark Souls 3. Regardless, it'll be interesting to see what happens. From what I've seen, it's a good bet that there will be a port, but who knows? We'll have to just wait and see. I hope so. It would be certainly nice to have something new to play for a while. I kind of find myself getting a bit burned out on Dark Souls 3. It's just there's nothing else that I'd rather play than a Souls game. And if I'm going to play a Souls game, it's probably going to be this one. And here he gets a little clap for the middle of the level resummon. So whenever you see a mid-level resummon like that, you know that they're on a mic. They're all grouped together. That's just frustrating. One thing you'll see in this video, my unlock crossbow play has just gotten better and better and better with time, and you'll see some pretty good shots coming up. I've had some good ones already, but I've got some even better ones coming up, and in the next clip I've got even better ones still. I used to play with a crossbow occasionally. I'd play with the Avalon, but I played with it locked on, and so its utility was kind of questionable. Now, if you used explosive bolts in the Avalon and you hit somebody in the face with all three, you could do some serious damage, but you blew through the explosive bolts so quickly, and you can only carry 30, and they're expensive, and the Avalon weighs so much. I forget how much it weighs, maybe like 8 units. For that reason, I'd kind of stayed away from crossbows, and the arbalest, which is generally regarded as the other good crossbow, is almost as heavy. So I'd kind of abandoned that. And then somebody, I don't remember if it was a clip I saw, had mentioned the light crossbow. And when I realized how light it was, I thought, oh man, I could really use that on a lot of my builds. And I had okay experiences with it, and I realized that to really get full value from a crossbow, you have to use it unlocked. I saw some videos with Damn No HTML where he basically had, I think he called it Haviland. It was full Havels with like 6 Avalons, or maybe it was Arbalest, I don't remember. But he would essentially switch between them, 3 on each hand, and he would just play with it unlocked. And he would talk about how everybody thought it was a joke build until they actually tried to fight him. And, you know, Scott obviously is incredibly skilled, but it was a very difficult weapon to fight against. And there you can see I try to go for the unlock backstab, and I pay for it. But here comes one of my favorite unlock crossbow shots. I even led him. That was very satisfying. But once I started getting better at playing unlocked with the crossbow, it really changed my game. And especially against groups of players, it totally changes the dynamic where you can stand back and with unlocked shots hit them. And once they realize you can hit them like that, it makes them a lot edgier. They start moving around, and they're far more likely to try and close the distance on you. I always get edgy chasing hosts through this area because those grave wardens can do so much damage to you. You saw just a moment ago they hit me, and I'm staying far away from the door because I don't want to get caught between the host trying to open the door and the grave warden. So this host by and large is just kind of a grade A puss. Can't play the game unless he's got like 3 summons at any one time. But I gotta give him credit here. He successfully fooled me there. I took the elevator all the way down, obviously. I bring it back up, send it back down so he can't double back behind me. And he died. I'm not sure what happened. He may have been back in the corner there by the elevator and tried to drop down and died. I suspect, though, he just punted and jumped off the level rather than deal with the humiliation of me killing him. So these guys were running a squad for some time. I think this was my 2nd or 3rd invasion against them. I won every one, but the 1 or 2 preceding weren't all that interesting, so I kind of left them out. I had originally thought about making a whole video just about this squad and my invasions against them, but it would have pretty quickly been boring. I think I'm pressing things a little bit as it is with this video, but there were some interesting things that happened that I want to showcase. So because I'm stacking so much poise, I have to use Havel's Ring, and I've got to have the Prisoner's Chain, and I've got to have the Ring of Favor and Protection, which only gives me 1 ring slot to swap, and I've been using the Obscuring Ring. This was actually recorded before I started going back with my sort of emphasis on criticals, so I don't even have the Hornet Ring on here. I'm trying to experiment with kind of different play styles. One of the notable things about this group, though, is that none of them are over-leveled summons. A host with 2 Phantoms at this level and neither of them being over-leveled is incredibly unusual. In fact, at first I thought I must have made some mistake when I noticed it at the time. And I had to go back and watch the clip to convince myself that I didn't miss something. All these guys seem reasonably handy, though, at PvP. I think all of them have done a fair bit of PvP at some point. I kind of came over to this island here to kind of get some distance from the host so he couldn't cheese me with his mage spells. And you can see here I'm just kind of raining a shitstorm down on these guys with my unlocked crossbow shots. That guy there with the greatsword ends up roll catching me more times than I would care to admit. And I was trying to take advantage of that PvE there. That guy that jumps on your head can be really fucking annoying until you get used to him. He's actually, I think he's kind of interesting because up until this point of the game, I don't think there's any PvE or very few PvE that don't get stunned. He's got a lot more poise than most of the PvE does. And so players up until this point of the game have probably been pretty well conditioned to just stun lock enemies with a bunch of R1 spam. He's one of the first enemies outside of like bosses that'll really punish that strategy. And that last 15 to 20 seconds was a bunch of poor play on my part. I kind of started panic rolling a little bit, and they were able to punish me pretty well for it. And there, if I'd had the Hornet Ring on, that would have been a kill. And frankly, what I should have done at this point was I should have swapped from the Obscuring Ring to the Hornet Ring. That's still something that I don't do often enough, that situational ring swap. And here, it's a big circle, so I'm trying to avoid having these guys sneak up behind me and trying to do the same thing to them. It's kind of funny. This host has got a parry shield out, and he hasn't tried it yet, but I know sure as shit he is going to go for it at some point, so I'm really keeping my eye on him when he's got that out. That Flash Sword spell is such a good spell. I'm always impressed by it every time I encounter somebody that uses it. I don't know if anyone knows if the swing speed of that spell is affected by the Sage Ring, because I don't think this guy's wearing the Sage Ring just because his other spells seem to be a little slow. And in fact, what's kind of funny sometimes is I sometimes get hit by spells in PvP because I assume that they have the Sage Ring on and they don't, and then I end up rolling too early and it ends up functioning as a sort of change up Actually, I wonder if you had a mage, if it would make sense to like swap the Sage Ring on and off to try and throw off your opponent's timing. I've heard other people suggest that you should be able to hold spells, and certainly if you could do that, it would be a game changer and it would greatly improve the utility of the mage class. I've played almost this entire fight unlocked, I think. Definitely getting a lot more comfortable with that. It's really improved my game considerably. So the host knows at this point it's probably over. There's the Hail Parry. Well guys, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great holiday. Take care now.